just going to talk about a few of the current KSU releases, and then some of the efforts we're going through for breeding, and then I will tell you about the 2 new ones we're going to release, although I can't tell you the name until the press conference at 4:40. But anyways, the numbers are out there. So, just a little bit about, the reason we're doing this. Why do we want to breed for better varieties? And, when it comes down to it, seedling trees, they're, as Neil said, they're hit and miss, right? You can go out in the woods and you can have a pawpaw that is just euphoric in flavor. And then you can go out and get a turpentine one or a really bitter tasting one, right? And I get really worried about folks releasing material where they haven't experienced a lot of pawpaws, and then they release something that's got a really, bitter aftertaste. So I worry about that. But basically, when you're breeding, if you take seeds from a Susquehanna or an Atwood and you plant those seeds, it's just like your children, right? You don't know if they're going to be exactly like you or if they're going to be really different from you because they go through sexual recombination, right? And so, seedlings, seed from a variety may or may not be close to that variety. Now, a lot of times it does seem like seed that comes from better varieties does seem to do better, right? And you'll get better selections, but it doesn't always have to be that way. So, of course, the best thing to do if you really want to get great fruit quality is to spend the money and go out there and buy the cultivars, these grafted varieties onto seedling rootstocks. And of course, we've got kind of a little list of varieties that are kind of good right now. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. Of course, we've got KSU Atwood, KSU Benson, KSU Chappelle right now. And, they're really good all-around pawpaws. We'll talk about them. And there's some good ones out there. Now, I wanted to say this earlier. Sometimes folks talk about how great heirloom tomatoes are, and there's kind of a mystique about heirloom being better sometimes. Well, that's not necessarily the case with pawpaw, right? Sometimes these older pawpaws are just not as good, and I know that, they're not necessarily terrible, and I don't even know if I should name one or not, but some of the ones that you used to be able to buy, Taylor, anyways, things like that, that, you hear about, and they're not terrible, but they're just, like if you can eat a Susquehanna or a Shenandoah, why would you want to plant a Taylor, right? So we've come a long ways in pawpaw varieties. So kind of thinking about that, I stole Neil's table from a while back. I don't know if you can read it real well, but I'll try. In fact, I'm going to have a hard time reading it from here, but I will try. So these are some things that he put together as kind of the variables included in the selection for Neil's selections. That's pretty much what we use too. He and I might differ just a little bit about our agreement on vigor. Now, I know you were looking for maybe something that's not extremely vigorous, not maybe low vigor, because that's hard to grow then in a nursery situation. I think everybody's heard of our KSU Pina Colada, and there's kind of a mystique about that because it does taste really coconut and pina colada, and nobody can get the thing to grow, right? They graft it and it dies, and so that was I'm gonna blame Sherry on that. No, she found it. It's really interesting, but it just isn't got enough vigor to really be propagated. And then you've got some that are kind of are less vigorous. Hopefully, they're putting more energy into fruit production. I think that was Neil's thought. Not to speak for Neil, but basically maybe you're not looking for overly vigorous, because the idea would be if you have high vigor, you might get more vegetative growth and less fruit production. But kind of what we're saying, that's a fine line, because you really do want to have some vigor, and I think medium to high is kind of what we're shooting for. Chappelle is a good example of almost high vigor, and yet it produces a lot of fruit. And so I think you can have both, and that's actually the best, especially for the grower and the nurseryman trying to grow them. So vigor is important with the tree. Yield, total yield, and that's kind of, where are we shooting for? And it kind of varies a little bit, but, it'd be nice to have 50 pounds of fruit per tree when it's mature, right? That would be something we might aspire for. Fruit set, we'd want to have good fruit set. Now, pawpaw is notorious for producing all kinds of flowers, and then maybe 10% of them set fruit, right? And then a lot of folks, the first couple of years after they plant a grafted tree, they'll get fruit set, and the little clusters fall off, right? And that's a real common thing. People go, I don't understand that my clusters are falling off. And that's kind of, I think, a canopy volume issue, because pawpaw really needs to get to a certain height, maybe about 8 to 10 feet tall, 7 to 8 to 10 feet tall, and a certain volume of canopy to support the fruit that it sets to fruition. So that's something to kind of look at, is yield, and fruit set. And cluster size is another thing, and that's something Neil really watched for. We don't want 13 fruit per cluster, right? That's too much competition within a cluster. If we could have single fruit, that would be better. And that's what Neil used to talk about, trying to cut the peduncle, right? Yeah. Right, yep, so you're picking off the same cluster, because one fruit will not be ripe for 4 or 5 days later, it's crazy. So you really would like to have one fruit, but at least less fruit per cluster is better, maybe 1 or 2 or 3. And then fruit size, and now we usually talk about 120 grams as kind of the minimum, and that's why the reason we talk about that is because that's what we don't really want to process anything smaller than that. There's just not enough pulp there, and so that's fairly mid-sized fruit, which quite a few cultivars hit. But the better size would be in the upper hundreds and 200 range average. And Neil was exactly right. We can go out and hand pick some nice big fruit away, but there's lots of little fruit in those little clusters, so you need to do the average weight if you're selecting for a variety. And fruit, so grams. I think fruit quality, is seed ratio to pulp is really important. So I know a lot of Neil's are about 4 to 5% seed. Some of ours are in that same range too. Some are just outside of it, kind of like up to about 7. When you get over 7, it's getting pretty seedy. It really is. And if you're starting to get up into the wild seedlings of 10% seed, which is more seed. And if you're out there looking for, maybe something to propagate, if you see these really long pawpaws, right, that have a lot of seeds, but usually very little pulp. It's more the egg-shaped or round pawpaws that have more pulp per seed, and that's kind of just a observational thing that you can use. Basically maybe number of seeds per fruit. You don't really want maybe over about 15 to 18 seeds. And an appearance is important, right? I would rather have something that doesn't get phyllosticta on the fruit, and that's kind of, some are more susceptible than others getting the black spot on the fruit, and that can lead to cracking too. Just some other things, aroma, sweetness. I think you got to be a little careful about sweetness. Maybe if you get up to like 27, 28 bricks, it's so sweet, it's too sweet, right? And so maybe you want to hit around 24 or 23 would be really good. And texture, we're always kind of looking for the firmness. In fact, Susquehanna is probably the firmest pawpaw I know of, and that's better for shipping, right? That's what we think. And Neil and I have shipped fruit to each other many times using every type of packaging you can think of, and nothing works very well, because they're soft, and so it'd be nicer if we had something firmer that didn't bruise. But that's something we're looking for. I'm not sure it's on here, but color break is a really important thing. So right now, I tell a fruit if it's softened, then I know that it's ripe, right? And I can over-ripen it after picking it. But that's the only way I can tell if it's really ripening. It doesn't turn yellow. Some turn a little yellow, like PA Golden, maybe that's 1 or 4, whichever one. But PA Golden, and there are a few others that turn just a little yellow. I'd love to find one that turns quite yellow when it's ripe and ready to harvest. What a labor saving that would be. And then just kind of overall flavor and aftertaste. Don't want to underestimate aftertaste. Sometimes they can have a great beginning and a bitter end, right? And pawpaw can have that, so you want to select for those that don't have it. So that's kind of in a nutshell. If you start being a private breeder and you start looking, that's kind of what we're looking for. And I actually just added this because I realized it was something I wanted to tell you about. But I've got a student in the bin who's probably out there in the hallway right now, but he's trying to kind of look at some of the crosses we've made. So we've made a lot of crosses between different parents. A lot of times that's with sunflower in the background, and I'll tell you why about that later another day. But sunflower is very productive, has a okay fruit, but it's very productive. And then Susquehanna's been another parent sometimes. Atwood's been another parent. But this is a female flower on the left side. You've got that kind of glistening stigmatic surface. That means it's receptive to pollination. And then this is the male stage of the same flower, right? Pawpaws have male and female parts in the same flower. And so that's the anthers just beginning to shed on that side. So you can take a paintbrush, and I think Neil's got some good information about that on the web yet too. You can take a paintbrush and you can take some of that pollen and go to another tree, right? Because we think they do need to cross-pollinate, and take and find a female staged flower and put pollen on it, and you'll get fruit set. And so that way you get a direct cross. Now, kind of the problem we had in all this was that we are not protecting the flowers before or after we pollinate. And we have tried a number of different things. I worked in the hazelnut breeding world for a while. We would literally build tie-vac, like it looks like fish houses if you come from Minnesota where I came from. They had their tie-vac houses around the hazelnut trees to keep them from cross-pollinating. And we tried using tie-vac wrap around pawpaw limbs, and it just destroyed the flowers. There was too much wind action. I know that Neil has used like little capsules, empty capsules sometimes to kind of put over the after he's pollinated a stigmatic surface. But the flowers are just very fragile. And here's another problem. This is some work that my student Subis, who's around here somewhere, also did. He looked at all the different pollinators of pawpaw. And Sherry and I were looking at some of the crosses that we had made. One time we actually bagged with netting some flowers before they opened, right? The flower buds, they opened up, and we went and did a squash and stained them, and we found pollen grains in the flower already. It's like, how did that happen? Well, Subis has found that ants are likely pollinators. So ants get in there. It's hard to keep ants out, right? Mainly it's lady beetles and flies that are the main pollinators, but there are ants apparently that get in too. So difficult to protect them. So it's kind of a numbers game. What we'll do is, here we actually had a student use a Q-tip, which actually did work too, to make cross-pollinations. And so this can be really quick. So he really wanted to know, do we have a valid method of actually making crosses between these? And we had some of these from 2016. So, what are the offspring? So he just asked that question. We'll kind of skip through. There was a number of different crosses. So, and this is just some mystery. So collected the leaves, extracted DNA from the leaves. He prepares the DNA. Magic happens. Right? And we use some primers, right? You can use different DNA primers to amplify little bits of DNA in humans or plants or animals. And these are called SSRs. They're simple sequence repeats. Anyways, and there's a sequence for those who are interested. So anyways, then we take that plant DNA, we put it in something called a thermocycler that heats up and runs a reaction. Then we separate them on a high pressure electrophoresis system. And then, that's why I said I'm not going to get into this too much. There's certain size products we would expect if it's parents or crosses. And so then we can look at the DNA fingerprint of what we have. And we can go across and say, okay, we had a sunflower by Susquehanna. Does it match up with what we think it should be? Here are the two parents, right? Here's the progeny. Is that what we expected? And you can already see a lot of yeses and nos right there, right? So to sum all that up in a little table, he found that only about the expected crosses, maybe only 54% were actually what we thought they were, sunflower by Susquehanna, and 45% were not. And so what happened? Right? Probably had a fly visit the flower before, maybe a fly visited after, or a beetle and brought some other pollen in. So it's really pollen that was from another tree, not the ones we thought, that made the pollination. Now, I say that because if you're some folks who want to start doing your own crosses, you have to be a little careful about assuming that you've really got the cross you think, right? The only thing you can say for certain is if you and it's always ladies first. So if it's sunflower by Susquehanna, sunflower is the female, right, male. So that means if it came from a sunflower tree, all you really know is for sure is that sunflower is one of the parents, right? And then unless you do this DNA testing, you don't know whether you really have the right pollen parent for that cross. So that's kind of the joys of doing, breeding and genetic research, is trying to make sure that you haven't then falsely advertised that this is a cross between those two, and it wasn't. So, just kind of looking at, I just show you like 1 year of data early on. We collect a lot of weight and seed and brick data first, right? And then we go out there and Sherry, Jeremy, and I and others go out and just kind of taste those selections and see if we think they're good. And of course, that means that we're kind of making a lot of determinations for everybody else, but that's what we try and do. But if we don't see something that's over about 120 grams on average, it's getting tossed, right? And it's really got to be much bigger to really stay in the game. And so, so the first one we released, that was back in, 2009, I guess it was Atwood, and we wanted to name it after what KSU. We wanted to have that on there, and we decided to name it after folks who were intimately either graduates or worked at KSU. And so Rufus B. Atwood was a long-term president there and kind of started the ag program. So anyways, really nice fruit weight. Now that fruit weight is based on, right, many fruit, right, many years. So it's not a huge fruit, although this is the funny thing about Atwood. Some years the fruit's much bigger. It does have a little more travel in the size of the fruit that you will get on it. And so it will venture upwards more. And it is a mid to late season ripening, and it's kind of very much a mango, and has no real color break at all, right? It's all about softness. And then we had KSU Benson that we released next, and so it has a bigger fruit, 180 on average, really round, right, like little cannonballs, and it's really early. It's a really early one, and it has a good flavor, but that round shape. But it's an early one, so you could think about that for planting. And then we have Chappelle, which is a really productive, vigorous tree. It probably does have the best yields and the best overall fruit size, and it has a little more of a kind of a banana pineapple flavor, and it's very low in seed, about 5% seed. So it's a really good pawpaw, and so that's and all of these we kind of know the female parent for, but we didn't know the male parent. These were the result of some selfing that happened. And so just now are we finally getting to the ones we did the crosses on. That's kind of where we're getting to. But just to stop for a second, so we continue to do a lot of crosses, and Sherry and I did a lot of crosses this spring. And so we're going to grow those out. Down in the greenhouse, we have a lot of crosses also growing out right now in pots. And we also have a lot of selfs. And actually, that's something else we want to do, just not selfs necessarily, open pollinated fruit, right? So we've just collected fruit, because here's the question is, how self-fertile are these? And I guess I'll present that in the next talk on Thursday, but pawpaw is not very self-fertile. It might only be like 5 or 10% of the fruit at best are going to be selfs, the result of self-crossing, not crossing, but selfing instead of crossing. And so, it'd be nice if we weren't dependent on other pawpaw varieties to cross with each other, but that's kind of the way it is right now. So anyways, we're growing those out, and we are going to see how many of the open pollinated ones are really selfs. We're using DNA technology for that. So that's kind of an interesting question too on a lot of these different varieties. Now, I can't tell you the name of this one yet. So this is just right now 7-1 or high 7-1. And actually, I think some of the nurseries already have it out there. And so it's a little seedy, but it's really got outstanding flavor, and that's why we're releasing it, and the fruit size is large. So it is a really good selection, and it's early to mid-season, which I want to have something else that's a little earlier, so that's a good one. And then this is 1-4, which has a large fruit also, and a fairly low seed content. So it's got a really much more of a mango banana flavor, pineapple banana, and it's mid-season. So these are 2 more editions that we'll have released now. And the university really wanted to go the patent route for these. The other ones we had were just trademarked, so they wanted to patent and trademark these 2, so they will be patented varieties that we're going to be releasing. But they're really pretty good, and so they're going to be nice additions. We'll have those 5 for you to choose from. I really like these as parents, and that's why I don't think we can say enough about some of Neil's releases, because Shenandoah, it is kind of a beginner's pawpaw because it's not a strong flavored fruit, but it's a wonderful tasting fruit. And so we're using it in a lot of, also in crosses, right? We're going to be using it in crosses, and I think it's got a really good, it's also got like that overlease background, if I remember right, and that's, I think overlease once a long time ago was kind of considered the industry standard years ago, and it is has that heritage. It's a really good pawpaw, and of course Susquehanna. Everybody loves Susquehanna. We want to use it with sunflower in crosses because we'd like to bring up the yield even more with some of the progeny, and so that's a really good one that we like to work with at K-State. Some of the others, as I said, sunflower is very productive. It originally was selected in Kansas, and there's some other reasons I'll talk about for acetogenin levels and things later on that we'll talk about Thursday. But it's a pretty good parent and not a bad one to plant also. And then, as I said, overlease really does have a nice round fruit you can see. It does die for us pretty quickly, though. That's one problem. Some of the trees do not live as long, we've noticed, and so I'm not quite sure what that's about. But even at home, I've had the same problem. So I think that moved up a little bit, but that's okay. So basically, we've got quite a few of those seedlings planted out here. I would hope that we will have some new releases in the next few years, maybe 5 years. The big thing is, and this is why I wanted to show you kind of what goes into this, is that and I encourage folks to watch, and if you see a wild pawpaw that's really good, you might want to consider trying to propagate it or talk to us or talk to others. But we want to find germplasm, especially it's got color breaks, right? And some of these other good traits, firmness, that would be more shelf stable. And we need that material because it's probably out there somewhere, but it's gosh knows where it is out in the forest, right? So keep an eye out for that. And if you're interested in doing some crosses, think about some of the things we just talked about today. But that's what we're doing at K-State right now. What time we got? It's time. So I think we really. I'll answer one question, but that's it. Any questions? Okay. Okay, good. We're going to close before anybody raises their hand. So thank you. So we're going to have a break. Now I think that maybe Blake and maybe, I don't know if Timothy Lane is out here. Where is he at? Maybe he's out here somewhere. I think, hopefully he brought some fruit too. I don't know if he brought any fruit, but we got one fruit anyway. We have a little bit of fruit out here, and I think a little bit from the orchards too that the graduate students got. And so if you want to try a fruit or two, they're in the hallway. Can't say that there's many out there though. What do you think, Sherry? Yeah, there's not going to be enough for all of you. But we will have a fruit tasting Thursday, right? That's the structured one that you'll have more fruit for. Some people were asked if they wanted to bring some fruit to share. It's out there. So if you don't get any fruit, don't worry. But there are other snacks out there. So we're going to reconvene at, I want to say, what time, Sherry? At 11. All right, we'll break till 11. Thank you.